The skyscraper loomed over Manhattan, its mirrored glass catching the gray dawn. Inside TitanCorp's boardroom, alarms screamed, red warnings flooding every digital surface. Headlines blazed across the walls, shattering composure in an instant. Executives erupted in frantic voices, each louder and sharper than the last. At the head of the table, Alexander Drake froze, the weight of power crumbling in silence. His gaze fixed on the chaos while Natalie Brooks leaned close, whispering with urgency, "This isn't panic, Alex. This is war." Outside, the plaza seethed with cameras, capturing his downfall in merciless detail. Betrayal stirred unseen, its blade poised. The rupture had come suddenly, ripping trust apart, and the empire trembled under its violent weight. Noise thickened like storm clouds. Phones buzzed, screens pulsed red, voices cracked into each other. Drake lifted his hand, demanding silence, but his voice trembled with strain. He said, "We contain this or it consumes us whole." Natalie's eyes scanned the table, reading loyalties like open books. Richard Hale leaned forward, voice smooth as silk. "Transparency is strength, Alex. Confession buys survival." His smirk lingered under polished words, daggers dressed as reason. Executives exchanged glances, some nodding, others recoiling. Trust fractured with every breath. Betrayal now whispered in the corners, circling with quiet hunger. Outside the glass tower, the plaza shook under a storm of cameras. Reporters shouted accusations, their voices clashing with flashing lights. "Did you commit fraud, Mr. Drake?" His face burned across giant outdoor screens, headlines multiplying in red. Inside, Natalie's voice cut cold. "They'll devour us unless we control the narrative." Drake's thoughts darted like sparks through contracts, enemies, and treachery cloaked in smiles. A chill struck him. This collapse was no accident. Someone inside wanted him buried. He muttered under his breath, words heavy with defiance. "They won't see me fall." The empire cracked, but he refused to let them watch it crumble. The boardroom air thickened into silence, heavy as stone. Natalie slammed her hand against the table, her voice sharp as glass. "We must act now." Drake's eyes fixed on Richard, searching for truth in his composure. Richard leaned back, calm as ice, and said, "Panic kills faster than truth." His words slid like poison wrapped in calmness. Executives murmured, alliances shifting like sand under tide. The loyal thinned, opportunists multiplied. Shadows grew longer, betrayal breathing in silence. Drake saw clearly. It wasn't enemies outside tearing TitanCorp apart. The collapse was born here, inside these walls. Night cloaked the city in neon and shadow. Drake stood alone in his office, the skyline glowing beneath him like a restless beast. His reflection stared back, a man burdened by ambition and betrayal. He whispered into the silence, "They won't take this from me." The city lights blinked like watchful eyes, uncaring of his private war. In that solitude, the rupture bled deeper. It was no longer just corporate, it was personal. The battle for TitanCorp had only begun, and his enemies were already tightening their grip. Silence had settled over the boardroom, but it was not peace. It was the silence of fractured trust. Drake stared at the faces around him, reading fear in every glance, betrayal in every whisper. The executives shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to Richard Hale, who now spoke with deliberate calm. "We can't shield the truth forever, Alex," he said, his voice calculated. Natalie's sharp reply cut through the tension. "This is no time for surrender." Drake felt the room closing in, as if the glass walls themselves had become prison bars. The once loyal board seemed distant, their faith drained by doubt. He was no longer surrounded by allies but by watchers, calculating their survival while circling his downfall. Isolation seeped into his veins, colder than betrayal itself. Outside the boardroom, Drake walked the corridors of TitanCorp, his footsteps echoing through halls once filled with reverence. Now whispers trailed behind him, colleagues averting their gaze, their loyalty dissolving like mist. Screens displayed headlines of collapse, stock numbers plunging, markets recoiling. "They smell blood," he muttered under his breath, eyes narrowing at the glowing red charts. He caught sight of an employee he once mentored, now avoiding his stare. Betrayal did not only belong to the board, it was spreading through the veins of the company. The empire he had built with iron will now slipped from his grip, and with every glance he saw not respect but fear. Isolation was no longer subtle. It had become a spectacle, and he stood at the center. Drake retreated into his private office, the walls lined with awards, photographs, and tokens of past triumphs. Yet tonight, they mocked him, reminders of glory now tainted. Natalie entered quietly, her eyes tired yet defiant. "They're turning on you, Alex," she said, voice steady but edged with fear. He turned to face her, fists clenched. "Let them. I built this empire. They forget who I am." His reflection in the glass window betrayed the lie. He saw not power but the shadow of a man being cornered. Natalie approached, placing a hand on the table. "But the empire doesn't remember loyalty. It remembers weakness." The words hung heavy, and Drake realized she spoke truth. His isolation had become his cage. The board convened again, their faces sharper now, no longer veiled by pretense. Richard's calm voice rang through the chamber. "Markets are in freefall. If leadership doesn't change, we all sink." Several executives nodded, their silence a declaration of disloyalty. Drake's voice thundered in reply, "Cowards will drown first. I will not be replaced." But the words landed on hollow ears. Natalie whispered urgently, "You're losing them, Alex. They've already chosen sides." He glanced around and saw it. The glances exchanged, the smirks half hidden, the shifting weight of power. Every ally had become a potential betrayer. He stood surrounded, yet utterly alone, and the realization stung more than the headlines outside. Late into the night, Drake remained in his office, the skyline a sea of neon reflecting his turmoil. The city below thrived in chaos, while his empire fractured above. He poured a drink, staring at the trembling surface, the reflection of his tired eyes staring back. "They think I'm finished," he muttered. The weight of isolation bore down heavier than the scandal itself. For the first time, he wondered if the empire had outgrown him, if the machine he built no longer needed its creator. Natalie's warning echoed in his mind. Richard's smirk burned into his memory. Alone at the window, Drake whispered into the night, "They won't take it without a fight." The city lights blinked like predators circling their prey. Morning light filtered through the towering glass walls, yet the boardroom felt like a battlefield. Drake entered with iron resolve, the weariness of the night concealed behind controlled fury. He addressed the executives, voice firm, "We're not surrendering to vultures. We'll fight back and we'll win." Natalie stood by his side, steady but cautious. Richard leaned back in his chair, lips curling in a smirk. "Bold words, Alex, but boldness doesn't change numbers." The board murmured uneasily, shifting between doubt and curiosity. Drake's hand slammed against the table, startling the room into silence. "I built this empire, and I will defend it against anyone, inside or out." The defiance burned in his eyes, but beneath it, he knew every word was a gamble with his fading power. In the war room of TitanCorp, Drake unveiled his counterstrike. Bold acquisitions, sudden partnerships, and aggressive stock maneuvers. Screens glowed with charts and contracts, each one a lifeline or a noose. Natalie leaned over the table whispering, "It's reckless, Alex, but it could work." Drake's eyes hardened as he replied, "Recklessness built this empire." The executives traded uneasy glances, their fear mingling with awe. Richard observed in silence, but his smirk betrayed a deeper scheme. Outside the glass, the city buzzed like a hungry machine, waiting for the next collapse. Drake's gamble had begun, a desperate push to claw power back from the brink. The first strike came swiftly. A surprise press conference streamed across every channel. Drake stepped to the podium, cameras flashing, the weight of billions pressing against his shoulders. He declared, "TitanCorp stands firm. We will not yield to falsehoods or hostile forces." His voice carried strength, though shadows lingered in his eyes. Reporters bombarded him with questions, chaos flooding the room. Natalie watched from the side, expression fierce, while Richard lingered in the background, his calmness masking quiet satisfaction. For every word Drake spoke, unseen knives were being sharpened. The counterstrike had been launched, but it carried the scent of blood as much as power. Back in the boardroom, whispers of sabotage surfaced. Natalie laid documents on the table, exposing leaks of confidential data. "Someone inside is feeding our enemies," she said, her voice edged with steel. Executives looked around nervously, suspicion cutting through the air like blades. Drake's eyes narrowed, scanning every face, his voice thundered, "Find them, or we all burn." Richard's calm gaze met his, unflinching, as if daring him to see the truth. The board dissolved into murmurs of fear and denial. For the first time, Drake realized the enemy wasn't just outside. It was seated among them, masked by suits and polished words. The counterstrike had revealed cracks even deeper than he imagined. Night fell again, the city's neon glow spilling into Drake's office as he stood before the glass wall. The counterstrike had begun, but the walls still closed in. He clenched his fists, whispering, "They think I'll fall. They don't know me." Behind him, Natalie entered quietly, her voice calm but urgent. "You've set the fire, Alex, but fire burns both ways." He turned sharply, determination in his eyes. "Then let it burn." Outside, the skyline glimmered like a battlefield, every light a reminder of what was at stake. The war for TitanCorp's survival had only just begun, and Drake's fury had ignited the night. The boardroom was tense, shadows stretching long as the evening sun dipped behind the skyline. Drake scanned the faces before him, suspicion sharpening every glance. Natalie whispered, "Something doesn't feel right." Richard rose smoothly, holding a file like a weapon. "The truth can no longer be hidden," he declared, voice calm yet venomous. He slid the file across the table. It landed with a thud, papers spilling, accusations, signatures, numbers twisted to implicate Drake. Gasps spread like wildfire. Drake's hand tightened into a fist, his voice low and thunderous. "You dare betray me?" Richard's smirk widened. "I didn't betray you, Alex. I saved myself." The walls of loyalty collapsed, and the first blade of betrayal cut deep. The betrayal deepened with Richard's next move. He revealed evidence of offshore accounts, false contracts, and trails designed to frame Drake. The board erupted, voices accusing, alliances shifting in real time. Drake's voice thundered above the storm. "Lies built by cowards will never break me." But doubt had already poisoned the air. Natalie stood beside him, her expression torn between loyalty and fear. Richard's calm composure fueled the chaos, every word he spoke dripping with authority. "Alex has endangered us all," he said coldly, "and it's time we act." Executives who once bowed to Drake now looked at him with suspicion. The empire he had forged was crumbling from within, and betrayal had found its champion. Night cloaked the tower, but inside the boardroom, the fire burned hotter. Richard's words had turned the tide. Executives whispered of votes, of leadership change, their loyalties slipping like sand through Drake's grasp. Natalie leaned close, her voice trembling. "They're choosing him, Alex." Drake's chest tightened, rage and fear entwined. He slammed his fist down, voice echoing through the glass walls. "I will not be overthrown." Richard's smirk never faltered, his calmness only sharpening the contrast. "The Empire is bigger than you, Alex," he replied, voice steady, "and it no longer belongs to you." The realization cut deep. Betrayal was not just personal, it was systemic. The knives were not hidden anymore. They gleamed in the open. Later in his office, Drake stared at the city lights with heavy breaths, betrayal echoing in every flicker of neon. Natalie entered, her voice breaking the silence. "Richard has the board, Alex. You need to strike back now." Drake turned sharply, his reflection fractured in the glass behind him. "I will not bow to traitors." Yet deep inside, he felt the ground slip. Every ally seemed a stranger, every shadow a threat. He poured a drink, the amber liquid trembling in his hand. Natalie's eyes softened, but her words cut sharper than steel. If you don't act tonight, you'll lose everything by dawn. Drake knew the choice was here: surrender to betrayal or counterstrike with fire. The night grew darker as betrayal fully unfolded. Drake convened a private call with allies he thought loyal, but one by one they faltered, their voices laced with hesitation and fear. Richard's influence had spread like fire, leaving Drake cornered in his own empire. Natalie remained, but her silence carried questions Drake dreaded. "You still trust me, don't you?" he asked, his voice breaking. She hesitated before answering. "I trust your fight, Alex, but even fighters can fall." The weight of betrayal crushed heavier than scandal. Alone at the center of his empire, Drake realized he wasn't losing a company. He was losing the war for his very identity. The storm had broken inside TitanCorp, but the real thunder struck when documents surfaced revealing a hidden hand. Natalie stormed into Drake's office, eyes blazing. "You need to see this." She dropped a folder onto his desk, its pages laced with proof of secret dealings. A shadow investor, long invisible, had been orchestrating chaos from the start. Drake's jaw tightened as he read the names, his empire reduced to lines of betrayal, inked in black. "So it was never Richard alone," he muttered. Natalie leaned closer, voice low. "He's just their pawn." Drake's world tilted as he realized every move he had made was being directed by unseen strings. The empire wasn't his to save, it was theirs to dismantle. The revelation hit harder when Natalie traced the connections aloud. Shell companies, offshore accounts, and payments that vanish like smoke. The money doesn't end with Richard. It goes higher. Drake's breath grew shallow, his hands gripping the desk. "Then who?" Natalie's gaze hardened, her voice steady. "A shadow investor. The one who truly owns this war." The realization burned through Drake's chest, fury mixing with dread. His empire was never just under attack. It had been prey all along. He whispered, "They're dismantling me piece by piece." Natalie's hand brushed his arm, steadying him. "Then we expose them, Alex, or they'll finish what they started." That night, Drake stood before a secret council of executives he thought he still commanded. His voice carried fire. "We've been played by a ghost, but if we stand together we can burn him out." Murmurs rippled across the table, doubt mingling with fear. Richard sat at the far end, silent, his smirk faint but telling. Natalie's eyes darted between the faces, her words cutting in. "This is bigger than survival. It's war for TitanCorp's soul." Drake felt the weight of betrayal sharpen, realizing the very men and women he addressed might already belong to the unseen investor. His empire was a battlefield where loyalty had no anchor, and every word spoken tonight could ignite or end the fight. The truth deepened with another blow. A recording surfaced, leaked into the board's private channels. It revealed Richard's voice speaking to an unknown man. The investor wants Drake gone by quarter's end. The boardroom fell silent, the audio looping like a knife. Drake's veins pulsed with rage as he shouted, "You've sold us to a phantom." Richard stood calmly, offering no denial. "I sold us to survival," he said coldly. Natalie's eyes blazed, her voice shaking. "You've doomed us all." For the first time, Drake saw fear ripple across even Richard's face. The shadow investor was no ally, not even to his betrayer. The revelation shattered illusions. Everyone was trapped in someone else's game. Alone again in his office, Drake faced the darkest revelation of all. His empire had been built on the illusion of control, yet unseen hands had always guided its fate. The city lights below blurred through the glass, neon bleeding into shadows. He whispered, "I thought I was the predator, but I was only prey." Natalie entered quietly, her voice steady. "The investor doesn't want your company, Alex. He wants you destroyed." Drake turned, his reflection fractured across the glass, the weight of the truth dragging him down. Still, his voice rose with defiance. "Then I'll fight not just for TitanCorp but for myself." The revelation had broken him, but it also lit a fire that could not be extinguished. The boardroom transformed into an arena as Drake stormed in, the skyline's night glow reflecting against the glass walls. Executives sat rigid, waiting for blood. Richard stood at the center, arms folded, calm like a victor. Drake's voice tore through the silence. "This is my empire, and no traitor will steal it from me." Richard's smirk deepened as he replied coldly, "It was never yours, Alex. It was ours to take." The tension was suffocating, each glance exchanged like a dagger. Natalie hovered nearby, her eyes locked on Drake, her loyalty unshaken, yet laced with dread. The final confrontation had begun, and every word was another strike in a war for survival. The first blow was verbal, but cut like steel. Richard unveiled a vote of no confidence, his words delivered with chilling calm. Executives whispered, nodding in secret agreement. Drake slammed the table, his voice thunderous. "You follow him, you bury TitanCorp." His eyes burned with defiance, scanning the faces of those who once cheered him. Natalie shouted, "Don't you see? He's selling you out." But Richard's icy retort struck back, "I'm saving them from you." The walls themselves seemed to shake as power teetered between two men. What once was empire had now become war, and the decision would define its fate. As the vote loomed, the unexpected occurred. An underestimated executive, Michael Ward, long ignored in the shadows, rose from his seat. His voice rang out, trembling yet resolute. "The company belongs to no traitor, no ghost investor, it belongs to us who built it." Silence gripped the room, eyes snapping to him. Drake's gaze narrowed with cautious hope, Richard's smirk faltered. Natalie whispered, "The underdog just turned the tide." In that instant, the battle shifted. Power, once chained to betrayal, now wavered on the shoulders of the least expected. The war was no longer just Drake versus Richard. It was every soul against the shadows pulling the strings. Richard snapped, his composure cracking. "You think a nobody can stop me?" His voice filled with venom as he turned on Michael. Drake stepped forward, voice booming, "Enough! This ends now." The clash of words erupted into chaos, executives rising, shouting over one another, the boardroom dissolving into war. Natalie's voice cut through like a blade, "Look around you. We're tearing ourselves apart while the real enemy watches." The room fell into fractured silence, breaths heavy, the truth undeniable. Drake's chest heaved as he stared Richard down, fury and resolve blazing. The climax surged, each heartbeat echoing louder than the last. The night ended not with resolution but with fire in the air. The vote was stalled, chaos leaving no clear victor. Drake stood by the glass wall, the city's neon glow casting fractured light across his face. Natalie approached, whispering, "You bought yourself time, but time isn't victory." He exhaled sharply, fists clenched. "Then I'll fight until there's nothing left to take." Behind them, Richard slipped out silently, his calm mask restored, eyes gleaming with unfinished malice. Michael lingered, silent but resolute, his presence a reminder that the battle had new players. The showdown was far from over, it had only drawn its first blood. The dawn bled across Manhattan, but inside TitanCorp, the air was heavier than night. Drake stood alone in the boardroom, staring at the city below. His voice broke the silence. "This is it, my last chance." Natalie entered quietly, her face lined with exhaustion, but her eyes burning with resolve. "The board will gather at noon. Richard will make his move." Drake turned, determination carved into his features. "Then I'll strike first." He felt the weight of every betrayal pressing against him, every scar of ambition now exposed. The Empire was no longer a company. It was a battlefield where one final act would define everything. The boardroom filled slowly, every seat a throne of judgment. Executives avoided Drake's eyes, their silence louder than any words. Richard arrived last, his smirk unshaken, his suit immaculate. He placed a folder on the table, saying coldly, "Today we choose survival." Drake rose, voice echoing like thunder. "Survival means nothing if it is built on treachery." Murmurs rippled across the room, power shifting like sand. Natalie's gaze darted between allies and traitors, her face taut with fear. The final stage was set, the walls humming with the weight of destiny. As Richard prepared to declare his victory, Michael Ward rose unexpectedly, his voice cutting through the silence. "We've been pawns long enough. This isn't about Alex or Richard, it's about TitanCorp." Gasps filled the room, the underdog's defiance shaking the walls. Richard's mask cracked, anger flashing in his eyes. Drake looked at Michael, stunned, then whispered, "The voice I needed." Natalie's hand tightened on the table, a spark of hope igniting in her face. The final confrontation was no longer a duel, it had become a war of many against the unseen shadows controlling them all. Richard snapped, fury breaking through his polished mask. "This company will burn with him," he shouted, pointing at Drake. The board erupted, some standing, others shouting, chaos ripping the room apart. Drake stood tall, his voice thunderous, "If I fall, I'll fall fighting for what I built." Natalie rose, her voice sharp. "This isn't about survival anymore. It's about legacy." Silence followed her words, the kind that cuts deeper than sound. For the first time Richard faltered, his certainty shaken. Drake felt the power shifting, fragile yet real. The end was near, and the moment of decision had arrived. The final vote never came. Instead, silence claimed the boardroom, broken only by Drake's voice. "You may take the company, but you'll never take my name." His words hung heavy, a mixture of defiance and surrender. Richard's smirk returned, but faint, haunted by doubt. Michael's steady gaze met Drake's, the underdog now the unexpected guardian of TitanCorp's future. Natalie's eyes filled with quiet grief, but also respect. Drake turned toward the glass wall, the city stretching before him like both empire and grave. His last chance had ended not with victory, but with a haunting legacy etched into every shadow.